Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Welcome to Target Prelims 2021. Today, we are going to look into the subject of Environment and Ecology. Now, through these series of lectures, we have been covering various different subjects such as polity, economy, international relations, and today we shall be looking at Environment and Ecology. If you are liking these lectures, please ensure to like the video, share the video with your fellow aspirants, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Now, that being said, for Environment and Ecology, we shall be having 3 sets of lectures. Now, in total, we shall try to cover all the different areas relevant for this subject from the perspective of prelims examination. So, we shall be taking a look at few of the key concepts. We shall be trying to understand the different perspectives of each of the concept. For example, if a question appears from heat dome, we have to understand what heat dome is, and thereby we shall proceed. So in total, if you look at the overall architecture of these 3 classes, in the first class, that is today, we shall be covering topics relevant to ecology and our ecosystem. Then in the next class, we shall be talking about the species and the protected areas. So we shall be talking about biodiversity, few of the national parks which have remained in use, and so on. Then in the third class, we shall be talking about the relevant conventions and laws which have remained in use throughout the year and which can be important for the examination. So without further ado, let us begin with the first class regarding ecology. So one of the most important topics for this year has been net zero emissions and the concept regarding net zero emissions. So what are these net zero emissions? And this has been in discussion whenever the topic of climate justice has come into appearance or prominence. So when we talk about, or whenever there is a discussion of net zero emission, it is not about the conversation that any particular country or any particular region doesn't emit anything at all. It is something completely and entirely different. And this is where most of the candidates, most of the students get confused. So let us address this first. What do we mean by this? So net zero emission means that all the emissions or all the greenhouse gases that we emit, either by the way of various farmlands or industries or domestic purposes, whatsoever might be the reason. So when we emit the greenhouse gases, we have to ensure that we take care of those greenhouse gases and we are able to trap them and we are able to store them, so that overall, if you take care, or overall if you look at the compensation or the gross addition to the atmosphere of the gases, that is zero, and hence the term net zero. So if suppose any country such as India, any country leads the margin of greenhouse gases in terms of its emissions. India is, by the way, the 3rd major country or geographical location when it comes to greenhouse gas emission. So in that sense of the way, net zero emissions don't talk about India having no emissions at all. All it talks about is that whatever greenhouse gases we are giving out, you have to store it, you have to capture it. So how do we do it? We do it by various different methodologies. So the basic act of storing all these gases back into the ecosystem, that is what is referred to as a negative emission. So when you talk about negative emission, it is carried out by various different techniques. Let us very briefly make ourselves aware of what these different techniques are. So starting with the basic and the most obvious one, that is afforestation and reforestation. So understand the logic here. Whenever you plant trees, these trees will end up consuming carbon dioxide. So overall, from the atmosphere, we are able to remove carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide shall be utilized by the trees to manufacture their food or various different types of sugar and energy substances. Then there is the alternative of biochar as well. So in that, what we do is we basically have partly burnt biomass and we add that to the soil. And biomass also consists of significant amount of carbon. So we are again returning carbon back into the Earth's system. Similar is the case with ocean fertilization. Now, what is ocean fertilization? So I hope that we are aware by now that all the major oceans and water bodies across the globe, they form a bulk of those areas where carbon dioxide is stored. On a perfectly ideal environmental condition, oceans themselves are responsible for storing approximately 45 to 50% of carbon dioxide which is emitted in the atmosphere. So what is done by this method is that certain important elements or minerals such as iron and other few nutrients such as calcium, they are added to the water. Now when you add these nutrients to the water, you thereby end up promoting the growth of phytoplanktons. Now what are phytoplanktons? Phytoplanktons are basically small cellular plant organisms which end up manufacturing their own food in the presence of sunlight. And these phytoplanktons serve as foods for various different marine species as well. So that is why when you fertilize the oceanic water, you thereby end up promoting the growth of phytoplanktons. And these phytoplanktons, they carry out the process of photosynthesis and thereby end up consuming a significant amount of carbon dioxide and resultantly reducing the load of carbon dioxide out in the atmosphere. Then after that, we also can capture carbon and store it, and thereby we can compress the gas and use it as an energy source. Other than that, we can have crushed minerals, we can go for artificial weathering of rocks. And when you do that, what is it that we are trying to achieve? So suppose there is a rock structure, or suppose there is a large mineral rock which is present out in the open. So carbon dioxide will always react with the surface of the rock and thereby form different compounds such as carbonates. But the surface area of that rock will always be limited, or whatever mineral is present in that rock, that surface area will always be limited. So when we undertake artificial weathering, we ensure that these rocks are broken into so many smaller pieces that overall surface area significantly increases. And when that happens, absorption rate of carbon dioxide also increases. And then we have the slightly unpopular method of air capture. This is a method whereby we have special vanes and we suck in air from the atmosphere, and those panels or those vanes, they separate the carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide is then mixed with water and then is sent deep into the Earth's surface where they get stored as solid materials. And in this way, materials or carbon dioxide from the atmosphere can actually be stored for a very long time. Recently, Iceland has tried this, and this particular measure or step taken by Iceland around 5 to 7 days back, when its first full factory came into operation, it was met with severe criticisms that air capture is not at all capable of meeting the demands that we have before us. So overall, these are the various methods by which we can reduce the load of carbon dioxide. Now, with the help of these negative emissions, any particular country can help attain or help itself reach that target of zero emissions overall. And very few countries have actually tried that. In fact, there is only one country, that is Bhutan, which is carbon negative. So when a country is able to reach the net zero emission target, it is also referred to as a carbon neutral country. When a country is able to overachieve its target and overall it manages to send more carbon dioxide into the ground or capture more carbon dioxide than it is emitting, then it is referred to as carbon negative. And as I said, Bhutan is one of those towering examples of a carbon negative country. So now let us take a look at the type of question that you can expect from this particular topic. Now, with reference to the term net zero carbon emissions, recently in news, consider the following statements. The first statement is, it refers to a state where a country's carbon emissions are compensated by creating carbon sinks. That is true. Then, it is the goal of 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change. Is this correct? No. Because when Paris Agreement was signed, each of the countries had their own nationally determined contributions or their own individual goals. Net zero emission was not one of them. This whole idea or the concept has caught traction in the previous year since China announced its intention to go carbon neutral in the near future. And it is that measure or that step by China which has put pressure on different countries such as India as well. So this was not decided by the Paris Convention or under the Paris Agreement. So this is incorrect. Now, before we look at the third statement, we know that the second statement is incorrect. Let us take a quick glance at the options. So out of the options, wherever 2 is present, we can eliminate that. So automatically we are left with only 2 options which can be correct. Now let us take a look at the third statement. Now, no country in the world has achieved or surpassed it. So this is where you have to look at the keywords. This is where UPSC plays with the question paper and the various terminologies in it. So, has no country in the world achieved it? Bhutan has achieved it. So this is also incorrect. So we have option A, that is one only, which is going to be correct. So when we have such multiple statement questions, it is always advisable that after every statement that we are eliminating, we take a look at the options. Because many of the times, even though few statements will be there, about which we'll have no clue, but overall we shall be able to solve the question just by the method of elimination. So always practice this technique to the best of your abilities. Now, moving on to the next question. Hydrodynamic trapping, solubility trapping, and mineral trapping are related to which of the following? So A, carbon sequestration, B, deep sea mineral exploration, C, coal gas exploration, and D, biodiesel extraction. So what is this hydrodynamic trapping? Now, we have been talking about carbon capture. So under this, what is done is that CO2, which is present in the atmosphere, and by the method of air capture, you manage to have concentrated CO2 in one place. So under very high pressure, this is mixed with water or H2O. And after that, it is pumped deep into the Earth's surface, where it is stored as a solid cubical or cylindrical material depending upon the pressure system, and there it can stay like that for many hundreds of years. So this is a way of carbon sequestration. But then what is solubility trapping? It is very similar to hydrodynamic trapping. In both solubility trapping as well as in the case of mineral trapping, we are mixing carbon dioxide which is present with different compounds so that it can be stored safely in the underground levels. Many of the times, even oil extraction from those wells where oil is not readily coming out. So in those wells, even there, carbon dioxide is pumped in with high pressure. And that significantly increases the pressure of the whole oil reservoir, and then extraction of oil becomes very easy. So along with that, carbon dioxide is also sequestered in those old oil wells as well. So here the answer will be A, that is carbon sequestration. Okay? Now, moving on to the next question. The next question is, with reference to methodologies used in clean coal technology, which of the following statements is or are correct? Now, when we talk about coal for a very long time, almost for 300 years, has been one of the most reliable sources of energy for a large section of the population across the globe. But then when you burn coal, you end up emitting significant amount of gases into the atmosphere. Where is coal consumed mostly nowadays? Nowadays, if you will notice, coal is consumed mostly and typically in thermal power plants, where coal is burnt and energy is generated as a result of that. Now, when we talk about clean coal, so obviously you cannot clean the coal of all the different constituents it has. So clean coal technology is basically a kind of a process whereby we take care or we ensure that the gases which are released after burning of coal, those gases are stored or they are taken care of. Now, in any of these industries, when you burn coal, especially in blast furnaces, wherever you have the iron and steel industries, or in various different thermal power plants, the gases which are emitted, they are referred to as flue gases. And these flue gases consist of various different compounds such as carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, etc. So we devise various different techniques. For example, we have electrostatic precipitators. Now what these electrostatic precipitators do is that they are a kind of long sheets. These are kind of long sheets that you have. And each of these sheets have different polarity in terms of charge. So when the flue gases pass through them, automatically they attach themselves to these long sheets and thereby they are separated. Similarly, we are able to separate gases such as sulfur dioxide. We are able to separate few of the portions such as black carbon which is emitted. And thereafter, when the final emission goes out, it is much cleaner. And this whole process is clean coal technology. So let us take a look at the various options which are present. Coal preparation is used to remove impurities and unwanted minerals in the coal. And this is done. How? By the method of grinding or pulverization. Many of the times, initially, the coal is ground down to very small pellets. And when the coal is actually converted into small pellets, it becomes very easy to segregate the impurities. Thereafter, the coal is washed. We have specific and special washeries in different locations which wash the coal down and remove these impurities. Once we are doing that, not only are we removing the various waste gases, we are also ensuring that the actual energy output is to the maximum. So yes, this is a methodology of a clean coal technology. Then the second option is burning the coal can be avoided altogether using the gasification technique. Now, what is this gasification technique? So, in this what we do is, it is referred to as integrated gasification combination technique. So, what is done is that under high pressure, various gases such as oxygen, they hit small powdered substances of coal. And after some time, the coal gets converted into a gaseous state, which is referred to as syngas. Now, that syngas can be burned because it includes portions of carbon monoxide. So, this syngas can be burnt and thereby used to operate gas turbines. It can also be used to operate steam turbines and generators thereby, and still provide energy at the end without all the different flue gases. So, this is also correct. So, now again we have 1 and 2 both, which we know they are correct. So, automatically you can eliminate option A because it refers to 1 only, option C it refers to 3 only. Now, let us take a look at the third statement. The third statement is removal of sulfur dioxide is done by and using wet scrubbers. So, what are these wet scrubbers? So, basically, when these flue gases are emitted, there you have certain liquids which move through these scrubbers, and by the property of these liquids, they are able to capture or they are able to react with sulfur dioxide present in the flue gases and separate them from the final emission. This process is also referred to as desulfurization. So, this is again a correct statement, and thereby you have option D, 1, 2 and 3 as the correct answer. Okay? Now, with increased global warming due to greenhouse gases, coal has become a point of contention for most of the developing countries like India, because we as a country are still relying upon coal for majority of our power supply. So, this is going to be an important one for your examination as well. Now, moving on to the next question. The next question is, with reference to the One Sun, One World, One Grid program, which was recently in the news, consider the following statements. Now, what is this One Sun, One World, One Grid? So, during his Independence Day address, the Prime Minister declared from the ramparts of the Red Fort his intention to establish this program of One Sun, One World, One Grid. Now, this whole program is envisioned upon the basic idea that, look, half of the earth is exposed to solar rays for any part of the day, and rest of that or rest of the globe is hidden from the solar rays. So, in order to ensure that there is a continuous generation of solar energy, why can't we have an overall larger world or a global grid, so that some part of the globe or the other shall always be exposed to solar rays and there shall always be a perpetual supply of electricity. That is the basic concept, that even if some portion of the globe is hidden and some portion of the globe doesn't receive sunlight, other portion shall be receiving it. So, as this program has been envisioned, India shall be acting as the fulcrum, with one end of the grid going towards the region of West Asia and Africa, while the other portion of the grid going on into the region around Southeast Asia. And overall, the next phase will then encompass leading or extension of those grids into the other regions of Europe and the other regions of Africa as well. So, the Ministry of Renewable Energy basically came up with the request for proposals for the detailed conception and conceptualization of this idea, and the technical assistance of this idea shall be provided by the World Bank. Okay? Now let us take a look at the statements. So the first statement is, it is proposed by the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, the MNRE, Government of India. That is true. It is the ministry which has called for various different proposals and advices and detailed initiatives which can be taken for this. So as of this moment, this particular program is still in its conceptualization phase. Now there are certain hesitancies as well, but overall India views an opportunity. So what are the hesitancies which prevail? Firstly, the hesitancy is that nowadays it is always more beneficial to have a kind of a rooftop solar. So rather than having a source spread across the globe, why can't we have a particular source directly at the point where the energy is required? So if that is carried out, then this whole program doesn't stand for any good. But then, where is it that India views its opportunity? So across the globe, various different countries have been building up their capacity for solar power and solar production. But still, it is China which controls or has a kind of a monopoly on the solar panel market. India views that role to be the energy dominator. Why? Because as of now, China is building these solar parks in various different countries of West Asia and Africa and is charging them a huge amount. India always seeks to carry out its relationship as a way of partnership. And thereby, if this program goes through, India can have a considerable heft in renewable energy sector, and that is why it is being pushed forward by the government. And that makes it important for the examination. Now, the second statement, it has been taken up under the Technical Assistance Program of the World Bank. This is true. And the third statement is, the International Solar Alliance shall be the implementing agency behind this. And this is also true. And this is very logical that if India is involved in such a mission of solar power, and India being one of the founder members of International Solar Alliance, International Solar Alliance shall automatically be involved in this. Okay, so this is also correct. So the correct answer in this will be D, that is 1, 2, and 3. Now, moving on to the next one. With reference to the energy flow in the ecosystem, which of the following statements are incorrect? That is, which are not correct. So please ensure that while you are going through the questions, you point out whether a correct statement has been asked or an incorrect statement has been asked. Now, the first statement is, sun is the only source of energy for all ecosystems on the earth. While on the face of it, it might seem to be true. But always understand, whenever there are absolute terms, that is only, all, always, there can always be a possibility of an exception. And most probably, UPSC shall be testing you for that exception, whether you know it or not. So here in the first statement you see that it is the only source for all the ecosystems. What about the deep sea ecosystem, where the solar rays are not able to penetrate? That is, at the bottom of the oceans, which are maybe at a depth of around 5 to 6 kilometers. Now, solar rays shall be able to penetrate only in the photic zone, that is, only up till a level of around 100 to 200 meters or sometimes 300, 400 meters. Beyond that, solar rays are not available. So how is it that in the lower region, energy is provided? That is provided by the process of hydrothermal energy. Now, what is this concept of hydrothermal energy? So, the water in itself exerts significant amount of pressure. The pressure is huge, it is humongous. Now just think about it as a way of analogy. If somebody tells you to put a bucket of water on your head, maybe you shall be able to do so, but still that bucket shall impose a significant weight on your head. Imagine if somebody comes and tells you you have to carry a drum of water on your head. The pressure will be much more. And bucket and drums are very small. Imagine a large ocean of 5 to 6 kilometers of depth. Now in such a situation, the pressure imposed by the overlying layers of water is so immense, it is so huge, that it ends up producing a slight amount of warming effect. And that warming effect is basically what ensures that the temperature is maintained at around 4 degrees C regardless of whatever depth that you go to. And that ensures that none of the species, they suffer frost or any of the areas which suffer freezing. Okay? So it is because of hydrothermal energy which is generated by the pressure imposed by the overlying layer of water. So the first statement shall be incorrect. Now the second statement, about half of the total incident solar radiation on the earth is photosynthetically active radiation. Now what is this concept of photosynthetically active radiation or PAR? So when the solar rays are received on the planet, these solar wavelengths or these solar rays rather, they come in various different wavelengths. You have ultraviolet, you have the normal visible, and you also have infrared. When ultraviolet rays appear or they are emitted by the sun, these ultraviolet rays are basically filtered out by the ozonosphere or the ozone layer in itself, which is present in stratosphere. Now, those rays which have very long wavelength, those rays are automatically not important for photosynthesis because they don't have enough energy. So wavelength in the visible spectrum, that is somewhere between 400 to 700 nanometers. Those wavelengths, they are utilized by the plant in order to carry out photosynthesis. And hence, this portion of solar radiation is referred to as the photosynthetically active radiation. Now this is important. Why? Because whenever you are undertaking a new afforestation program or a reforestation program, or let's say you are trying to grow crops or cultivate a new area altogether, you do carry out a study of PAR in order to ensure, in order to make sense that how much solar rays will be available here and whether the plant shall be productive enough or not. Even while studying the marine environment, many of the times this PAR is very important in determining the growth of underwater plants. Because water bodies especially, many of the times they are muddied and they have a kind of a turbulence in them. So the amount of available sunlight anyways is in a reduced form. So if you look at the statement, half of the total incident solar radiation is PAR, and that is correct. So we have to find out basically which of these were incorrect. So the answer in this shall be A, that is 1 only. Okay? Now, but from this particular question, you have to ensure that you understand or you actually extract the importance about the hydrothermal energy as well as PAR. Both of them can form individual topics. Now, after that, the next question, that is, the term Stardust 1.0, sometimes mentioned in the news, is related to A, telescope to find the movement of stars in space, B, the first space rocket powered by biofuel, C, satellite internet constellation being constructed by SpaceX, and D, anti-asteroid missile developed by NASA. So what is it? Since it is an environment class, it is very easy to predict here. It will be B, that is the first space rocket powered by biofuel. So basically, Stardust is a special kind of vehicle which has been designed by a company based in United States, and that company is Blue Shift. Now they have made this special vessel which can carry small payloads to the range of around 8 to 10 to 15 kgs, and they can carry these payloads into space by pure utilization of biofuels. Now, how are biofuels made, by the way? They are made by certain specialized crops. Certain kinds of biofuels, they are made specifically with any kind of crop. You can make that. So that is how you manufacture biofuel, which is totally and completely green in nature. But when you talk about space exploration and the various different rocket programs, you would have seen in videos or in whichever other medium possible that every time there is a space launch which takes place, there is huge amount of emission, huge amount of smoke which is given out. So under such circumstances, building a rocket Stardust is a significant leap in technology. Now already the company is coming up with the version of Stardust 2.0, which would be able to carry much larger payloads. Now these payloads of smaller weight, 8 to 10 kg, immediately your mind must be thinking in the direction that what is the use of such a space vehicle? But then these small payloads are enough to carry research satellites which are made by various different students of different colleges, and they can be useful for cheaper launches as well. So in order to know our atmosphere and in order to know the whole region around the earth better, this can be much useful. So the correct answer in this will be B, that is the first rocket or the first space rocket powered by biofuel. Now, after this, there is another important topic or a concept which has been in news and which has been in much prominence in the previous few months, and that is the concept of a heat dome. Now, what is this heat dome? So basically, in regions around Canada and parts of United States as well, unusually high temperatures to the range of around 46, 47 and even up till 49 degrees Celsius was experienced on ground. Now as a result of that, many hundreds and thousands of various different animals and also certain plants, they started dying. An unusual heat wave overtook the whole American or rather North American continent. And thereby came the idea of a heat dome, which is exaggerating the amount of heat which is experienced in that region. So let us understand what is this heat dome, how is it formed, and why is it so devastating. So before that, we need to understand that areas such as Canada and northern part of United States, even during the summer months, the temperature hardly breaches 30 degrees Celsius mark. Mostly it remains in the region or the range of around 22 to 26 degrees Celsius. As per Köppen classification, you would have studied it to be a kind of a D-type climate in the case of Canada. Now, when under such circumstances, the temperature suddenly climbs up to the level of around 49 degrees Celsius, it means havoc and destruction and devastation. Now the name has been suggested to be a heat dome because as per the weather and the meteorological agencies, there is a kind of a dome-like structure which has been created and air is trapped underneath it. So let us understand the origin of this heat dome, why it has come into existence, and what are the various facets associated to it. So, heat dome was actually, or the heating of the Canadian and the whole North American continent was actually initiated due to the warming of the Pacific, the Western Pacific in particular. Now, when we talk about the conditions of the Pacific, we have the ENSO cycles, right? The ENSO cycles, they stand for the El Nino, La Nina, and again the neutral phase. So, it has a kind of an oscillation. You have a neutral stage, you have the stage of La Nina, and you have the stage of El Nino. So, constantly there is a kind of an oscillation from one stage to the other. Now, what happens under normal or neutral circumstances? So, there, as you can see, under the influence of the trade winds, warm water which is present on the surface, that is carried over to the region around Western Pacific, and Western Pacific becomes significantly warm. Now, why is it that warm water in itself is carried out? So, basically, when you think about an oceanic water, the highest temperature of that oceanic water is experienced on the surface. So, the temperature of the oceanic water is going to be highest on the surface. Why? Because the prime source of heat for the oceanic water is going to be solar insolation. And the solar insolation will be heating up the surface of ocean to the maximum. So, that is why when the winds are carrying the surface water, they are basically carrying the hottest portion of the oceanic water. And that is when you observe the trade winds moving generally from a northeast to southwest direction in the case of northern hemisphere and southeast to northwest direction in the case of southern hemisphere, they have a virtual carrying effect from east to west. This is the neutral phase of ENSO. Now, how does it develop? So, as this warm water develops in a region, this area becomes a center of low pressure, whereas due to upwelling activities, you have high pressure in this area. So, a stronger wind movement is initiated between the high pressure and low pressure. This stronger wind movement facilitates more warm water being carried out. So, overall, you have a La Nina condition which is achieved, whereby the whole Western Pacific, even in the subtropical region, there is a presence of warm water. Now, coming to the context of this particular year. So, this year, the La Nina conditions were very severe. As a result of that, overall accumulation of warm water was significantly more, even in the region of subtropics. Now, when we talk about the wind pattern or the permanent wind systems across the globe, between the tropics and the temperate region, we have a permanent wind system, that is the westerlies, which keep on moving. So, basically, here in this particular area, we have the westerlies, and these westerlies, they were significantly warmer as compared to the previous years. Why? Because these westerlies were originating over the region of warmer water. So, these westerlies managed to carry significant amount of warm air and temperature into the North American continent. And that in itself was responsible for a significant rise in temperature. But was that all? No. There was also an involvement of other phenomena, that is the role of jet streams. Now, what are jet streams? Jet streams are basically fast band of air moving in higher atmosphere and they move with a great velocity, but at the same time they have a kind of a wave-like pattern, and it is a three-dimensional wave-like pattern. So it has got a kind of a vertical wave developing in itself. So at some regions these westerlies or these jet streams rather can dip up to the height of around 6 kilometers. In certain areas they can move up till a height of 13 kilometers as well. So they have a kind of a vertical dip, and as you can see from the satellite imagery, they have a kind of a horizontal or latitudinal variation or wave-like pattern as well. Such specific kinds of waves generated by jet streams are what are referred to as Rossby waves. Now, why do we need to know about this? Because if you take a look at the jet stream and the satellite picture itself, this tells you that wherever a jet stream is in existence, it doesn't allow the wind from or the air masses from different areas to mix. So if suppose warm air carried by the westerlies, they reach here, they would be trapped in this portion. So colder air coming from the polar area won't be able to enter or won't be able to mix readily because of the availability of the jet streams. Only when the jet streams they shift during various different turn of seasons, only then the air masses are able to mix with each other in a homogeneous manner. Now, coming back to the La Nina condition. So the warm westerlies which carried higher temperature due to the larger and extensive and more prominent La Nina, they carried higher temperature and then they were trapped by the jet streams. But then the jet streams, they played a much greater role. What happened was that because this air was trapped and this air continued to heat up the ground surface. Now when the ground surface got heated up and there was an existence of an overlying jet stream above it. So after heating, even if warm air mass, it started to rise. This warm air mass was met with a very strong envelope on top, and thereby the air was then pushed back. Now when the air is pushed back to the surface, it undergoes heating by the process of adiabatic compression, that is, the air is forced to compress itself, and when the air is forced to compress, its temperature always will increase. So that is when the air which was pushed back was significantly more hot. And when that hit the ground surface, the temperature of the ground surface significantly increased. And this was a continuous process which took place. So air was pushed up, that air basically it encountered the overlying envelope and that pushed the air back into the system. As the air was being pushed back into the system, it underwent a kind of an adiabatic compression, or what is also referred to as the adiabatic heating. And due to this adiabatic heating, the temperature of the ground surface significantly increased. And this created a structure of a dome, and that is why it is referred to as heat dome. Now this heat dome was initiated because of multiple factors, as we saw. There was a huge temperature gradient which existed between the Western Pacific and the Eastern Pacific. And that is why the wind system which moved ahead, those wind systems were also particularly warmer. Even in the upper atmosphere or in the upper region of troposphere, the warm air which rose up from the region around Western Pacific because of that low pressure, that warm air went and subsided into the region around the North American continent. and thereby it inhibited or prevented any cloud formation whatsoever. Because wherever you have a sinking air column, you cannot have a cloud formation. Cloud formation shall always end up requiring a rising air column. So that is why we had an absence of rainfall, which increased the overall temperature of the ground, and it brought in about a severe heat wave. Now, heat wave is brought about when atmospheric moisture is also consumed. Because as you increase the temperature of atmosphere, the overall humidity percentage also goes down. So that is when the air also becomes dry, the ground also becomes dry, and many of the species, they are left at the mercy of nature. So this is an important concept for this particular year. It can be asked in prelims or in one or the other form in the mains exam as well. Now, let us take a look at the question which can be asked from here. So, with reference to heat dome, which was recently in the news, which of the following statements is or are correct? Now, the first statement, it is the phenomena in which the atmosphere traps hot air over the oceans due to the high pressure conditions present over it. Now, La Nina, it is present over the oceans. So the whole region has experienced a virtual trapping of heat, and that is why this will be correct. Then, heat dome prevents the occurrence of heat wave condition as it traps heat within it. So if it is trapping heat within it, how can it prevent heat wave conditions? It will not. So this is incorrect. Now, the third statement, the reason behind the recent occurrence of heat domes in the Pacific Ocean was due to the gradient in oceanic temperatures from west to east in the tropical Pacific Ocean. And this is correct. There was a temperature gradient between western and eastern part of Pacific, which was very, very predominant. So this is again correct. So you have an overall on option C, that is 1 and 3 are correct. Okay? Now, after this, there is another concept which was in prominence when IPCC released its report, and that is the concept of climate forcing. Now, what is this concept of climate forcing? So, we receive Earth or we receive heat on the Earth's surface primarily by the solar insolation and the solar radiation. Now, if you consider Earth as a planetary system, solar radiation or solar rays are virtually received as short wave radiation, and they are released back from the Earth as long wave radiation. Now, both of these are ideally in a balanced state, and that is when we say that Earth has got an ideal heat budget, where we are losing as much amount of heat as we are receiving. And when Earth manages to lose the equal amount of heat when compared to the amount of heat it receives, there is a maintenance of temperature on the surface. If suppose Earth as a system loses more heat than it receives, what will happen? Year after year, Earth will become cooler and cooler. On the contrary, or on the other hand, if suppose by some event or the other, Earth manages to retain more heat as compared to what it receives and it loses less amount of heat, every year the temperature shall start increasing. And in both of these methods, there is an unusual climatic heating or cooling which is experienced. So the various factors which lead to the Earth trapping more heat or Earth losing extraordinary amount of heat, those factors, they are counted under climatic forcings or radiative forcings. Now, these forcings, many of the times, they manage to reduce the temperature in certain areas, many of the times they end up increasing the temperature observed in certain areas. So that is why understanding radiative forcing is important. It is of two types. It is positive and it is also negative. So when, for example, any of the elements present in the atmosphere, such as your normal greenhouse gases which are present, the greenhouse gases, right, all of these, they trap significant amount of heat and they reflect a significant amount of heat, thereby increasing the temperature, and that will be counted under positive forcing. Sometimes what happens, there are certain aerosols such as certain elements of sulfur, or sometimes when there is a volcanic eruption which takes place, the ash which is spread out into the atmosphere that reflects the solar rays and doesn't allow the solar rays to come to the ground surface. So all these activities and all these events, what do? They bring about a cooling impact, and these cooling impacts shall be counted under negative forcings. So when IPCC released its report, it made sure that it emphasized both positive and negative climatic forcings. So basically, various different greenhouse gases, and here carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and most importantly methane, because methane is oftentimes ignored and we don't think of methane to be a big contributor, but methane is the second largest contributor to global warming. So all these, if you will see, these are basically positive forcings because they increase the overall temperature. But then there are certain aerosols which are present in the atmosphere. So if suppose this is the Earth's surface, there are certain aerosols which are emitted, let's say, from a volcanic eruption. So this volcanic eruption will release clouds and various different types of soot, ash, etc. They will form a protective layer. And when the solar rays then come into the picture, these solar rays oftentimes will be reflected back without reaching the Earth's surface, bringing about a cooling effect. And that is why the concept of artificial volcanoes has been doing rounds in scientific community, because this is one of the ways by which you release the desired aerosols and thereby ensure that the temperature is reduced. Now, because this topic has been in relevance throughout the time since IPCC has come and the IPCC report has come into prominence, this again forms an important portion. So, with reference to climate forcings, which of the following statements is or are correct? The first statement: climate forcing is related to the amount of energy we receive from the sun and the amount of energy we radiate back into the space. That is true. It is related with whether we are increasing that energy, whether we are losing more energy, etc. Then, a positive forcing is one in which light aerosols from volcanic eruptions cool Earth by reflecting sunlight. But then, when you have a cooling effect, that is always referred to as a negative forcing rather than a positive forcing. So this will be incorrect. The third statement: a negative forcing is the one in which excess gases or dark aerosols warm the Earth by absorbing sunlight. Now again, this is the opposite of it. Negative is something which cools it down. So this will again be incorrect. So overall, you can see that the correct answer is A, that is 1 only. Now in this situation again, if you were aware, let's say you did not know what the third statement was. Suppose you just had looked at two statements and you knew that one is correct and the second is incorrect. So automatically you would be able to eliminate B, because it talks about 1 and 2 both being correct. You could have eliminated C because it talks about only 3 being correct, but we know that 1 is also correct. And then you would have the doubts between 1 and option A and option D. So that is also how you can always end up maximizing your chances, and there will be such questions where the statements can be very vague in certain cases. So that is where you have to keep that approach in mind. Now, one of the factors which always actually contribute to a kind of a positive forcing is basically black carbon. Black carbon is a kind of a soot that is generated. So when you burn any energy minerals or any material which gives off energy, you have small particles of carbon which are also actually emitted. And these are black in color. So they will absorb more sunlight. What is being experienced nowadays is that this black carbon not only is being inhaled by us, thereby causing heart diseases, strokes, lung diseases, lung cancer, etc. if you are exposed to it for a longer time, but also this black carbon is now being deposited over various different glaciers and also mountain tops. In fact, the most startling discovery came into light when it was found that black carbon deposits are present even in the region of Mount Everest's base camp. And that significantly increases the rate of warming, because ideally over an ice cap, what do you have? The ice is white in color. So whatever sun rays are received, majority around 85 to 90% are reflected back, thereby keeping the ice cooler. But suppose on this ice sheet you have many different particles which are black in color. Now when they receive sunlight, black color will absorb it and very less amount will be reflected back. And because of this, glacial melting of ice caps, etc. is being observed across the globe. Now, when we talk about black carbon, it has got various different sources. Transportation is a major source, but most importantly is the household energy. So when you cook the food with the help of, let's say, cow dung or charcoal or wood, etc., oftentimes you end up emitting significant amount of black carbon. That is why the Ujjwala Yojana is beneficial for atmosphere and from environment aspect as well. Now, the impact of it absorbs sunlight and converts it into heat energy. Because it is black in color, it accelerates the melting of snow and ice. And even in agriculture, many of the times you would observe that in the cases or in the regions where pollution is very high, for example, in the regions of the national capital area of New Delhi, you will find that in many of the trees and the leaves, you will have deposits of these powdered black carbon. What they end up doing is, they end up reducing the overall area through which photosynthesis can be carried out. And the energy which the plant requires, that is diminished. So the black carbon can have its impact even in the case of plant and the floral life. And it prevents clouds from being formed, as well as it influences the regional patterns for rainfall. Now, the question basically which can appear from black carbon, but also overall when you take a look at other different emissions, they are also very important. And as I have reiterated, methane emission is particularly important because it is the second largest contributor to global warming. So over the last 2 centuries, methane concentration has basically more than doubled. And methane is not some innocuous gas that we are releasing into the atmosphere. Methane has more than 25 times potential as compared to carbon dioxide when it comes to heating up the atmosphere. So, where do we find methane to be released from? So, just like we saw the various sources for black carbon, we have various different sources for methane as well. So, you have agriculture waste, you also have cattle. Many of the times, slaughterhouses are the biggest emitters of methane, right? So, wetlands, the different wetlands that we have, at any point of time, if the water level significantly goes down, emission starts. Sometimes you also have methane emissions in significant amount in the case of peatlands as well. Peatlands, I hope that you are aware, are those regions where you have marshy or a kind of a shallow water covering the trees and the forest types which are actually submerged there. So, when these peatlands, they get devoid of water, all the different buried carbon elements, they end up releasing methane in very large proportion. Then you have fossil fuel obviously as another source. You have lakes, oceans, and also by biomass burning, we end up emitting methane. And methane is returned back to the ground by reaction with the soil or various different chemical compounds. Overall, if you will observe, there's a kind of a imbalance or a kind of a mismatch. More is emitted, less is absorbed. So that is why there is a kind of an increased methane concentration which has increased the warming effect. Now, let us take a look at the types of questions. These two are very important concepts. Questions will be framed from this. Let us take a look at that. With reference to black carbon, which of the following statements are correct? First, black carbon is the strongest absorber of sunlight. That is true. So, it will be correct because it is black in color, and being black in color, it will automatically absorb more amount of solar rays. Second, they stay in the air for a longer period of time. Now, this is incorrect because this black carbon, understand the property of it, it is slightly heavier. So, it does not suspend itself into the atmosphere for a very long duration. Whenever there is a convectional movement of air or whenever there is an upper air circulation, all this black carbon is actually saturated and is actually, you will find that in various places on the trees or on the ground surface, you will find accumulation of these black carbon. So, they don't remain in the air for a long time. They will actually be dissipated from the atmosphere within a matter of few weeks to a matter of few months at max. So, this is incorrect. Now, second is incorrect. Eliminate all the options where 2 is present. You will automatically be able to eliminate the 3 options and you will be left with the correct option, regardless of whether you know the third statement or not. Now, the third statement is Project Surya is aimed at reducing the level of black carbon in the atmosphere. Now, what is Project Surya? Project Surya has been initiated with an objective to actually do away with non-sustainable methods of domestic cooking. So, all the households where still charcoal, wood, etc. are used for cooking purposes, in all those households, and under the Project Surya, we have the provision of solar cookers and also solar heaters. So, that is where Project Surya is aimed at reducing the overall impact of black carbon, because you saw that the maximum proportion or the maximum generation was from household sources. So, if household is taken care of, the problem or the menace of black carbon will automatically be taken care of. Now, the next question. Which of the following are the long-lived greenhouse gases? Now, what is the meaning of it? This means that out of the given gases which are present, which of them can stay in the atmosphere for a very long time? Because these greenhouse gases will be trapping heat. So, any of these gases which remain in atmosphere for a largest period of time, they will be able to trap heat for the longest duration. So long-lived greenhouse gases, they are always going to be harmful for the environment. Always they are going to be harmful and detrimental. Now, let us take a look at the various different gases that we have. First, carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide remains in atmosphere for a very long time. In fact, any carbon dioxide or any parcel of carbon dioxide which is present, it does not completely or totally dissociate itself. Some portion of it will be present, and some portion of it will react with various different substances, but some portion will always be present. So it remains for hundreds of years sometimes. In fact, it is estimated that there was a very big volcanic eruption at Krakatoa around the 19th century. It is estimated that the carbon dioxide and the carbon monoxide which were released during that volcanic eruption shall remain in the atmosphere for at least 250 years still. So that tells you that the periodicity of the stay of carbon dioxide is high. So this is correct. Then water vapor. Now, is water vapor a greenhouse gas? It is, because water vapor also traps heat. That is why in those areas where water vapor is present in significant amount, you will find that the temperature is maintained. It doesn't get very cold, it doesn't get very hot. Why? Because whatever heat is received or is released back, it is trapped by the water vapor, maintaining the overall temperature presence. But then when water vapor is present in upper atmosphere, oftentimes it is subject to various different cloud formations or condensation activities in itself. So water vapor will not remain in atmosphere for a very long time. So we have 2 that is incorrect. Let us figure out where these 2 is present and let us count it out. Now, here we also know that 1 is correct. So automatically you will be able to reach the answer. That is why I am telling you that you have to practice this technique. The third is nitrous oxide and the fourth is black carbon. Now we have seen that black carbon doesn't remain in the atmosphere for a very long duration. It is a matter of weeks or a few months at maximum. Nitrous oxide, however, does remain for a very long time. Nitrous oxide, methane, all of these, sulfur hexafluoride, HFCs, all of these, they are long-lived greenhouse gases. They remain for hundreds of years, if not for 1,000 years altogether. Some, such as sulfur hexafluoride or SF6, they can exist in the atmosphere in some trace or the other for almost 20,000 years. So it is very large period of time. Methane can exist for roughly around 72 to 75 years. So these are the long-lived greenhouse gases. So nitrous oxide will also be able to remain for around 100 plus years. So that is also a kind of a long-lived greenhouse gas. So we have 1 and 3 which are correct, and C will be the correct answer in this case. Now, next, consider the following statements with reference to carbon dioxide. First, carbon fertilization occurs due to increased level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And second is, carbon sequestration involves capturing and storage of atmospheric carbon dioxide for long-term storage. So regardless of whatever the first statement is, we know that the second statement is correct. Now, what is the concept of carbon fertilization? So recently, the scientists stumbled upon a very startling discovery. They found that the green foliage or the green cover in many parts has been continuously increasing. And it has been increasing continuously. Why? Because more photosynthesis is being carried out. And why is more photosynthesis being carried out? Because of increased concentration of carbon dioxide. So that particular process or activity has been referred to as carbon fertilization. So carbon fertilization is when, due to increased amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the plants are able to, or the leaves are able to trap more amount of carbon dioxide, consume more amount of carbon dioxide, carry out an increased rate of photosynthesis, produce increased foods, and thereby grow significantly. So that is why it occurs due to increased level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This is again a concept which has been in relevance in the previous 6 months. So here you will find that both of them are correct. So you have C, that is both 1 and 2. Always while marking out, please ensure that you are looking or you are taking care of whether correct or incorrect statements are being asked here. Okay? Now, after this, we come to the part of agriculture as well. Because when it comes to pollution, agriculture has been receiving focus significantly. Because agriculture alone and in itself is responsible for many different types and kinds of pollution. Firstly, the most basic kind of pollution that happens due to agriculture is what? There, we spray various different chemicals, various different fertilizers. And when we are spraying different fertilizers, what happens? Those fertilizers will seep into the subsoil, into the groundwater, or might be emptied into a nearby lake. Now, when that fertilizer is emptied into the nearby lake, it triggers the growth of algae, what is also referred to as a harmful algal bloom. Now, this harmful algal bloom, which can happen over any water body, is due to excessive supply of nutrients. And this process is what is also referred to as the process of eutrophication. Now, when this happens, the species which are present in that water body or in that aquatic system, they start dying. Because all the oxygen, etc., which is required by those species, that is actually consumed by the algae. And that is when the overall oxygen level significantly drops in the water body and the marine life perishes. This is just one of the impacts. Now, in certain states of our country, such as the western part of UP, Haryana, Punjab, all these areas, there has been an incessant extraction of groundwater for agricultural purposes. And irrigation is carried out via the method of tube wells, where you simply flood the field with water, let the water evaporate. Now, all that water is extracted from underground level. What that basically means is that in the underground aquifers, the water level has gone so low that now when you extract water, you find traces of nearby rocks in them. And not only minerals such as arsenic and fluoride, they come into the water. Sometimes traces of heavy metals or heavy elements such as uranium are also to be found. That is why across every state nowadays, it is being slightly nudged to the farmers that don't go for incessant extraction of groundwater, because it can lead to uranium coming into the fields, and that uranium will be consumed by all of us. So if you take a look at it, then agriculture alone accounts for 14% of the global greenhouse emissions. How? Which are the gases which are emitted? So you have gases such as methane and also sometimes CO2. CO2 is basically emitted when the ground cannot absorb any more CO2, so the ground becomes a net emitter of carbon dioxide, and this is happening in many areas. Then basically, when you have increased usage of pesticides, The land pattern, how the land is being used, that in itself is getting changed. Overall, various different streams of river water, lakes, ponds, etc., everything is getting polluted. There is need to go for sustainable agriculture. And that is where few of the important topics such as various different methodologies of agriculture suddenly becomes important. If you take a look at an overall spread effect, then basically you have, due to fertilizer activity or fertilizing, nitrogen and phosphorus surplus is present in the groundwater, which can lead to eutrophication in the nearby lakes. Then many of the times when we apply significant amount of manures, there is a release of ammonia gas, which is again a greenhouse gas. Cattle, various different cattle, they also significantly are responsible for emission of methane. Then pesticides, other than that you have antibiotics use. Soil compaction is also one of the detrimental effects of the way in which we carry out agriculture. What is this soil compaction? Soil compaction is, suppose when you are taking out or when you are undertaking a plowing activity, you are preparing the field before the sowing season. Now during that time, you will deploy a kind of a heavy vehicle on the soil. That heavy vehicle by its own weight will press upon the soil repeatedly so much that the soil, which is supposed to have a natural aeration, which is supposed to trap air within itself and moisture within itself, that soil becomes compact. Its water holding capacity reduces significantly. The roots, ideally, when you have a plant which grows, the roots also grow simultaneously. The roots, they spread their tentacles within the soil. But imagine a circumstance where the soil has been hardened and compressed to such an extent that the roots cannot even grow. So that is when we need to undertake various different techniques such as zero tillage. We'll look at zero tillage as well subsequently, but then water use has been another one of the concerns in the present day system or the method of carrying out agriculture. Now why? I said because of over irrigation, oftentimes the groundwater is extracted. But many of the times when you cultivate normal crops such as paddy or rice, you inundate or you flood the whole field and then you grow rice. That not only consumes significant water, but a lot of water is actually lost into the atmosphere. Also the soil becomes saline as a result of it, as a result of evaporation. So crops such as paddy or rice, they should not be grown in areas where you don't have significant amount of rainfall. And that is why UPSC has always asked a question regarding the growth of rice in the regions around Punjab, Haryana and Western UP, because these areas receive very scanty amount of rainfall. So even water use has to be looked upon. Now keeping that in mind, let us come across a question regarding the contamination of the whole groundwater. So with reference to the uranium contamination of groundwater, which of the following statements is or are correct? The first statement, long-term exposure to it may cause cancer in humans. Very correct. No such contamination is witnessed in any Indian state till now. This is very incorrect. Approximately around 14 to 16 Indian states have been found to have uranium contamination in the groundwater. Then overuse of groundwater will enhance the contamination process overall. That is again correct. So in this the correct answer will be D, that is 1 and 3 only. Okay. Now the next question. With reference to the process of system of rice intensification, consider the following statements. Now as I said, cultivation or growth of rice is harmful ecologically, environmentally, and if you take care of the ecosystem as well. It has got a very defined logic to it. Understand the process. So ideally what is done is, basically, when rice saplings are planted in the field is flooded with water and it is allowed to grow. Now you have produced, let's say, 1 ton of rice. But even in order to produce 1 kg of rice, you require close to around 5 kiloliter of water. So suppose India tomorrow becomes one of the largest rice exporters in the world. So thereby, are we only exporting rice or are we also exporting our groundwater? Because we have actually spent this much amount of groundwater which will not be recharged so easily. So that is where rice cultivation is the most unsustainable agricultural practices which has been going on. And typically flood irrigation is followed. So under this backdrop, system of rice intensification is a new method which has been brought in, whereby the saplings are planted at a particular spacing between them. They have a significant amount of space between them and water is supplied directly to the root system. In many of the cases, water is supplied by drip irrigation as well. Thereby, you supply fertilizers along with the drip irrigation, the process which we also refer to as fertigation. And overall, you ensure the availability of moisture to the crops, ensure productivity, and also ensure efficient utilization of groundwater. Now, here the first statement is, dry season with assured irrigation is more suitable for the process. Now here assured irrigation is the important factor. Otherwise, if you take a look at dry season in itself is not enough for rice, because for rice as a crop you require at least 100 centimeter of rain. Okay? So here assured irrigation is needed, then you can grow it even in the dry season. Second, the seedlings are planted in close spacing for effective water intake. This is incorrect. Under the present system of flood irrigation, why it is referred to as a flood irrigation again? Because we flood the farmlands. There, all the saplings, if you look at any rice farm or any rice field, they are planted very close to each other. But when you talk about this particular system of intensification, it is planted at a spacing. Third, it involves usage of farmyard manure over synthetic manure. Now, why this is done? This is done to keep the overall farm cost at a lower level, in order to ensure that the cost that a farmer incurs, that is low. That is why farmyard manures, suppose you have dried leaves, you have leftover remains of twigs, branches, etc., all that is allowed to decompose and then you have the overall farmyard manure. So that is used. Now why do we need to reduce the farm cost? Because of the simple logic that when you talk about farm income shall be cost, or rather what you sell minus the cost that you have incurred. So if we manage to bring down the cost incurred, thereby significantly we can manage to increase the farm income. And various committees have been set by Government of India, including the very famous Ashok Dalwai committee, who have also recommended these steps in order to improve the farm income. So this third statement will also be correct. So the answer in this case will be A, that is 1 and 3 only. Okay? Now, moving on to the next particular concept or the question. Now, this concept is of a dry land farming. Now, why are we discussing agriculture all of a sudden here? Because in environment, you have to understand that agriculture is one of the leading causes of unsustainable environment as well. And particularly in our country, where the farming sector, where the agricultural system has been under a significant stress and the farm income has been reducing because of varied rainfall patterns, etc. Every year you will find UPSC to be asking more questions from agriculture, both in prelims as well as in mains. So that is why it is important for us to know various terminologies and various different methodologies as well. So coming to dry land farming. What is dry land farming? Now, the name in itself will tell you. It is that kind of farming where you don't have access to irrigation. So, small and marginal farmers who dominate the majority of our farming community, approximately around 86.5% approximately. That is the share of small and marginal farmers in our country. Now, many of the small and marginal farmers, they don't have the wherewithal to dig a tube well or take a connection from a canal. So, they don't have an access to irrigational method. So, what and how do they end up providing moisture to the ground surface? By the help of rainfall. So, those types of farming techniques, or rather those kinds of crops which are grown purely by the availability of moisture as is done by periodic rainfall or monsoonal and seasonal rainfall, that is what is referred to as dry land farming. So, crops such as pulses, millets, the three kinds of millets, that is jowar, bajra, ragi, all of these, they are typically the products of dry land farming. And you must be aware that how throughout the country the rainfall pattern is changing drastically. So, what we are observing is that 1 or 2 months of absolute increased rainfall followed by approximately 8 to 9 months of dry, bone dry conditions. In these cases and in these scenarios, dry land farming comes to the rescue. Those crops which require significant amount of moisture, they are bound to fail. And when the crops fail, there is a whole vicious cycle. The farmer goes into debt, and that leads to an overall weakening of the rural economy. Rural economy, when that weakens, it leads to weakening of the urban economy as well, because the demand dies down. And overall, the GDP growth, as you will see, will always dip down. So, which of the following crops are best suited for dry land farming? First, sugarcane. Now, sugarcane is a crop which requires roughly around 100 to 120 centimeter of rain. So, sugarcane is incorrect. In fact, there is a very famous case study that you will find regarding sugarcane, that in many portions of Vidarbha in Maharashtra, there were multiple instances of crop failure and farmer suicides going on. And that is when it was found out that even though in Vidarbha the rainfall pattern has changed, the traditional farming and what you call as farming inertia, many of the farmers are still growing the same sugarcane crop which fail year after year because of lack of rainfall. So, sugarcane is one of those crops which requires significant amount of water availability. Ragi, it is a kind of a millet which can grow on hill slopes as well, on different temperature ranges as well, and dry conditions as well. So, this is true. Even bajra is true. It is also a kind of a millet which can grow in dry conditions. And both these, they are very nutritious rather. That is why across the globe, millets and millets consumption and their production is being focused upon, because they are environmentally more sustainable. They are rich sources of calcium, iron, fibers, and in certain cases even proteins. So that is why they are beneficial in order to fight the menace of hidden hunger that the society has. By hidden hunger, we mean the menace of malnutrition, stunting and wasting, where even though people consume rice and wheat, they are having deficiency of certain vitamins, certain other minerals, or in our case, iron in general. Now, rubber is a plantation crop. It requires significant amount of moisture. That is why it is typically grown in the tropical areas of the world. This is incorrect. And jute. Jute is in fact one of the most water guzzling crops that you will come across. Jute requires close to around 150 to 200 centimeter of rainfall, and not at one time, in distributed time. One prior to the monsoon, one during the monsoon, and sometimes an extended monsoon helps. So that is why jute is incorrect. So you are left with 2 and 3 will be the correct one, and that is what is the option B in this case. Okay? Now, the next question. With reference to Saguna rice technique, which was in the news recently, consider the following statements. It is a zero-till cultivation method practiced on permanently raised beds. Second, rotation of crops is not possible in this technique. Third, higher recovery percentage of grains is achieved during milling of paddy. So what is the concept of milling of paddy first of all? It is when you extract the grains of rice and you separate every other byproduct such as husk, etc. That is what is the process of milling. Okay? Now, it is a zero-till cultivation method practiced on permanently raised beds. What permanently raised beds here refers to basically when you have in a farmland a structure somewhat like this, where you end up planting crops on these different places, these raised platforms. These are raised beds. So this is done. Now, Saguna rice technique is basically what had been followed or what was actually followed in the Raigad district in Maharashtra. So from that it had gained a significant amount of prominence. So yes, the first statement is correct. Now second statement is that rotation of crops is not possible. That is incorrect. Because in this particular method of farming, soil fertility is basically ensured, or soil fertility is maintained by ensuring continuous rotation of crops. Around 10 to 12 different varieties of crops are grown. Leguminous crops such as peas, pulses, etc., they are also grown, and that is how we have a maintenance or a natural recharge of nitrogenous fertilizers into, or nitrogenous nutrients into the soil itself. So the second statement will be incorrect. The third is there is a higher recovery of grains because the grains are much more healthier because the soil has much greater aeration which it receives. It has always got an access to air from the sides. The soil will always have access to air, and that increases the soil's water holding capacity and fertility levels as well. So that is where you have the third statement to be correct as well. Overall, you have statement or option B, that is 1 and 3, which is correct. Now here you come across the term zero-till cultivation. This is again very important. Now why is zero-till cultivation important? Because we have seen that soil in itself can start acting as a natural source for carbon dioxide emissions. And when soil starts acting, and when you upturn that soil basically, when you plow it, when you undertake tilling activities, you are overturning the lower layers of soil into the upper region. And that releases significant amount of methane, carbon dioxide, etc. So not only does it lead to greenhouse warming or greenhouse gases resulting in global warming, but also at the same time, when you till or plow the soil, you do it with the help of a heavy machinery. What we studied earlier under soil compaction is what harms the plants. So that is why zero till is something which is of vital importance. Now what is this zero till? So before that, take a look at the Saguna rice technique that we have talked about. So here, if you will look at it, I hope that you are able to observe a kind of a raised platform here. This is the raised bed that you are talking about. So on a permanently raised bed, this is the permanently raised bed. So under normal rice cultivation, this is a kind of the land which is prepared. When you undertake a cultivation under this technique, you have a field which appears like this. And that is why it is much more efficient. The plants can grow in a much more significant fashion. Now, when you talk about zero tillage, it is basically a soil cultivation system in which seeds are deposited directly into the untilled soil. So, in this case, when you don't disturb the soil at all, what are the benefits that you gain? So, suppose you have harvested rice and you want to plant wheat. Now, before that, if you have plowed it up, if you have tilled the soil, then basically you have an ease of planting the new seeds. But at the same time, soil is exposed to the vagaries of nature, be it rainfall, be it high velocity winds, etc. And many of the times, splash erosion is caused. What is splash erosion? Splash erosion happens when on any soil surface you have significant amount of raindrops falling, and each of them create a kind of a small splash, and this continuous process degrades the level of topsoil. Other than that, if the topsoil is exposed as it is, then you also have instances of sheet erosion taking place. Now, under this sheet erosion, you have the topmost layer of the soil in itself being drained away. So, you are left with a subsurface soil which is going to be infertile. Parts of southern Haryana, northern Rajasthan and western Madhya Pradesh are experiencing this. That is why tillage in general is being disincentivized and is being discouraged. In fact, in the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the convention which was held and the conference of parties which was held in September last year in India, zero tillage was one of the main topics which was discussed. Now, how is it that zero tillage can prevent this erosion? In the case of zero tillage, we don't disturb the medium of soil at all. We let it be as it is. And the remnants of the crops, as you can see, they are still prevalent. They keep the soil in its place. They ensure a kind of a organic content present in the upper region of the soil itself, and they ensure that aeration of the soil is maintained. So here are few of the advantages that you have. That first of all, you have an improved soil condition. Why? Because all the residues that were present, all the plant residues from the previous crops, they decompose and they add on to the organic matter. Higher infiltration is caused by the vegetation present on the soil and by the decomposition of the dead roots. Less resistance to root growth because of improved structure. What does this mean? So we had seen about soil compaction, that when you run a heavy roller, soil compacts. In that case, the root growth is inhibited. When you don't disturb the soil, when you don't press the soil hard, the roots can grow easily. And less soil compaction by the reduced movement, and that will lead to a lesser soil erosion as well. But then at the same time, there are a few disadvantages as well. And for one of the disadvantages is that sowing operations, that is planting the seeds, that becomes very difficult because the soil becomes hard, it is hard. So you have to undertake, or you have to take the help of special machineries by which you can directly sow the seeds into the lower levels. Seed germination is lower because the plantation itself is difficult, and then the upper layer is particularly harder. Then continuous use of herbicides is needed, because if you don't till the soil, weeds and the growth of weeds will be very significant. And in minimum tillage, more nitrogen has to be added as the rate of decomposition of organic matter is slow. So that is why in order to aid or in order to counter this disadvantage, leguminous crops or legumes are planted. Legumes refers to pulses, then you have peas, etc. All of them naturally recharge the nitrogen content. Okay? Now, the question, which of the following are disadvantages of minimum tillage? Such type of question has been asked by UPSC in 2018 as well. And you will find such type of questions to be in relevance. Zero tillage, mulching, these will always be in relevance. Now, first, sowing operations are difficult with ordinary equipment. That is very correct. Then, seed germination is lower with minimum tillage. That is also true. It is also one of the disadvantages. Then, more resistance to root growth due to hard soil structure. Hard soil structure is achieved when there is a compaction of soil. So this is incorrect, because in minimum tillage, compaction is actually something that you ensure that it doesn't happen. Then it needs continuous use of herbicides because the growth of weeds will be significant. So while you have to be aware of the advantages, questions can be turned around into the form of disadvantages as well. So you have to be prepared for that. So in this case, the disadvantages shall be option B, that is 1, 2, and 4. Okay? Now, next, the agricultural census. So consider the following statements with respect to the 10th agricultural census. Now, agricultural census, what is the concept of it? Now, when we talk about census and census activities, it is basically a stock taking exercise where you carry out survey and where you have a clue that census is generally carried out for population. You would have heard census in terms of population. So what is this agricultural census about? Agricultural census is taking the stock of the land holdings. What is the size of the land holdings? What each and every farmer has? What is the percentage of female participation in the workforce? Which particular state has observed an increase in operational area? Which particular state has observed a decrease in operational area? So all these are carried out. Why this exercise is carried out? In order to have a better clue regarding which government schemes and policies you have to make in order to ensure more agricultural efficiency and a larger benefit to the population. So, agricultural census is being carried out in our country since 1970-71. Now, 10th and it is carried out after every 5 years. 10th agricultural census has been carried out. The details of that have been released, and basically a significant detail has been released recently. The census was carried out in 2016 itself, but then all the details and the collation of data has been released recently. That is why agricultural census again becomes important. Now, one of the important key outcomes that you can take from this census is that the percentage of female participation in the workforce that has increased. Now, it can be taken both as a positive as well as a negative. Positive because in labor force you have participation of female members. In a negative way because in most of the agricultural practices it is unproductive, so the labor force is not being utilized. Now, first, total operated area in the country has increased since the 9th agricultural census. This is incorrect. The operational area has actually reduced. Then, small farmers hold the largest number of operational land holdings in India. Again, this is incorrect, because other than small, we also have a category that is marginal farmers. And it is these marginal farmers who are present in significant majority. So this is also incorrect. The third is average size of operational landholding, the size of the farm that you have, that has increased as compared to the 9th agricultural census. Can that be possible? The overall operational area has reduced, population has increased, so per person availability of farmland will be much less. So that is why the average size has reduced rather than increasing. So this is also incorrect. So which of the statements given above is or are incorrect? The answer shall be, in this case, D, that is 1, 2 and 3, all of them are incorrect. Now just to give you an idea, this is the basic criteria for the classification of the farmers. So you have marginal farmers who have a land holding size of less than 1 hectare, and you can see that almost close to around 100 million operational land holdings, that is close to around 1 crore of the farmlands are with marginal farmers. Then small, they occupy an area of 1 to 2 hectares, that is again 25 million. So out of the total of 146 million, a whopping amount of 126 million is comprised of small and marginal farmers. So small and marginal farmers, they occupy or they constitute close to around 86% of our farming community. Remember that. This is always going to be important given how in the previous year agriculture has gained prominence. Now then, another issue or another particular concept is of soil solarization. Now what is this concept of soil solarization? So in a nutshell, it is basically an environmentally friendly method of using the sun's power to control pests such as bacteria, insects and weeds in the soil. Now what happens is that when you have to ensure that microbial infection doesn't happen in the soil, you have to basically ensure that and you apply chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides and weedicides to kill all these. But then under the method of soil solarization, you use the power of solar energy. And how do you do that? So basically what is done is, first of all, the soil is drained, or rather moisture is supplied in significant amount. You supply significant amount of water to it so that overall the soil becomes damp. Now after that, you cover the soil surface with a kind of a plastic sheet. A sheet. Now generally you have biodegradable plastics which are used for this, so you cover it with a plastic sheet. Now what happens? Solar waves or solar energy is always high, so that is why the wavelength which is received will be in the form of short wave. It will be able to penetrate those plastic sheets. It will heat up the soil. But then when the heat is released by the soil, it will be trapped by the plastic sheet. And under the influence of this increased or concentrated heat, the various different pests and various different microbes which are harmful, they are significantly destroyed. So this is a natural method, but for this method you need the soil to be damp, because otherwise what can happen is, when this continuous process of heating is carried on for many days together, the soil, whatever is left of it, is bone dry, and then that is not fit for cultivation at all. There is a kind of a flaky appearance that you observe in the soil. So that is why soil solarization is an important natural method of sustainable agriculture again. Now, the question, with reference to the soil solarization method, consider the following statements. The first statement is, it involves the utilization of solar radiation to control soil-borne pathogens. Those pathogens which will grow only in the soil, not in air or any other medium. So yes, this is correct. The soil needs to be kept dry during the process. This is incorrect. The third is, this method is more expensive than chemical soil disinfestation. That is again incorrect, because the whole process of buying the chemicals, applying the chemicals, the labor charge, everything, that is always going to be a costly process. So that is why this is a much cheaper process in order to ensure that basically the soil is disinfested or disinfected rather. So you have this as, or rather this is incorrect as well, because this method is not more expensive, this is rather cheaper. So which of the statements are correct? So you have A, that is one only, which is going to be correct. Okay? Now, the next question. With reference to Hyderabad being recognized as 2023 City of the World, which was recently in news, consider the following statements. Now, the first statement is, it is the only city in India to get this recognition so far. Second statement is, this recognition is given by the Food and Agriculture Organization. Now, Hyderabad is one of those cities which has been significantly working hard to improve the tree cover. The Telangana government has launched various different programs. One of the famous one are the basically Harit Haram project as well as the urban forest project. Now, because of these steps, significant amount of resilience shown by the green foliage in the city of Hyderabad, the existing tree structures are conserved and afforestation programs is also being carried out within the city limits in the open spaces. So that is why it is actually the only city in the country which has been awarded with the Tree City of the World, this particular award. Generally, this award goes to various cities in Western Europe, United States, Australia, etc. In India, Hyderabad is the first city which has made a foray into that. Now, this report is actually brought out by Food and Agricultural Organization FAO as well as an NGO, that is Arbor Day, which is a non-profit organization based out of United States which looks into the afforestation and reforestation programs. So Arbor Day Foundation has also contributed along with FAO to come out with this particular report. So that is why this is also correct, because FAO nonetheless is responsible for bringing out this particular award. So that is where which of the given statements are correct. So you have C, that is both 1 and 2 being correct. Okay? So overall, we have looked at various different concepts today. We have looked at the concepts of pollution. We have looked at the concept of heating and aggravated heating in certain parts of the globe. What is the actual issue with black carbon, methane, climate forcing? All of that we have looked into. We have looked at the net zero emissions. We have also looked at various methods or various important terminologies in agriculture, because agriculture, increasingly you will find questions from agriculture appearing in the exam. We have looked at the concept, or rather a bit complicated concept, of heat domes as well. And we have looked at certain minor concepts while looking at questions such as long-lived greenhouse gases, then carbon fertilization, etc. So all these different concepts that we have studied or we have looked into questions can be framed from each one of them. And that is relevant for the prelims this year. So just revise those concepts. Just ensure that you are clear with them. But more importantly, in order to gain maximum marks in the prelims, please practice the method of elimination as well. Because when it comes to subjects such as environment, geography, agriculture, science and tech, etc., oftentimes when you go through the option statements which are provided, those statements are so complicated that you might be knowing one or two, but not the third and the fourth. It is there that candidates who are able to reach a logical conclusion, they benefit quite significantly, and they are able to increase their marks by around 15 to 20 in the prelims exam. So I hope this particular session was useful for you guys. Thank you for being patient enough. And tomorrow again, we shall be meeting to discuss about biodiversity, species, protected areas, and all the new developments. For example, carousel, why those species are in use. So all those particular topics we shall be covering tomorrow. So see you again tomorrow. Till then, take care of yourself and have a good night. Thank you.